Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. A new article written by the barrister Sam Fowles argues that the recent riots in the UK were a result of years of journalists and politicians spreading far-right tropes. He says that influential figures bear responsibility for the violence and that politicians have a vested interest in not referring to the riots as terrorism. So I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by the author of that article, barrister Sam Fowles, and Toby Young as well from the Free Speech Union. Thank you both ever so much for joining me. Sam, it's your article, so I want to come to you first and discuss this with you. Can you just firstly clarify what you mean by far right? Because the article mentions examples of really horrible far-right terrorist behaviour, ethno-nationalism, all these really repugnant things. But you also refer to people who have got concerns about immigration. Do you think that they're all far-right, or is there a very clear distinction in your mind?
I think if you are demonising or blaming people of different ethnicities to you for your problems based on misinformation, then yeah, that is probably far right for me.
OK, Sam, I want to give you an opportunity as well to just outline your key argument in the article that you wrote for the magazine.
Sure. Well, the basic point is that for about 30 years, politicians have systematically made a lot of people in the country poorer. We've become less socially mobile, and over the last austerity period, the richest people in the country doubled their wealth and increased their incomes by about 4.7%, while the poorest fifth lost income by about 1.6%. Now, obviously, politicians can't say, oh, we're really sorry we've made you poorer and essentially made your lives a whole lot more difficult. So they try to focus anger elsewhere, i.e. on people of different ethnicities, people of different colours, people of different religions. And they do that by adopting far-right conspiracy theories. And so a good example of that is Suella Braverman claiming that the majority of grooming gangs are Muslim. Which is, in fact, according to her own department's data, absolutely untrue. And the majority of grooming gangs are white.
So just to be clear, Sam, are you arguing that statements like the one you just quoted from Suella Braverman, those kinds of statements from politicians, that they are directly responsible for the riots that ensued?
No, I'm arguing that they create the context for the riots.
Got you.
People have to take responsibility for their own actions. The immediate cause of the riots were people deciding to choose violence rather than Google a conspiracy theory online and realise that it was completely untrue. OK,
I want to bring Toby Young in now at that point. So Sam's got a point, hasn't he, is that the various politicians potentially have raised the temperature, but ultimately the rioters are responsible for their own actions. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm reluctant to blame senior politicians, heads of think tanks, journalists, dating back 15 years for the recent disturbances. I would have thought that the reason so many ordinary people, particularly in deprived areas, and I wouldn't quibble with Sam's criticism of previous governments for not doing more to level up, but I would have thought the reason they are angry about excessively high levels of mass immigration is not because they believe in conspiracy theories, not because they've been led down rabbit holes by irresponsible politicians, but because they can see in their own communities the impact that the rapid influx of people with very different cultures, people who come from far-flung parts of the world, they can see the impact they're having. They can see the impact they're having on wages in service jobs. They know that in some cases they are responsible for violent crimes, particularly violent crimes against women and girls. They're aware of various ways in which people who've recently arrived in their communities disdain them, don't have any respect for them or the British way of life. And I think, the public have been expressing their unhappiness about the current level of immigration for a long time. The current, I think Migration Watch found out that a majority of the British people, certainly not just people on the far right, want to reduce the overall level of inward migration.
Well, let me ask Sam about that specifically, Sam. I mean, can you envisage a situation where it's not a far right thing to have some legitimate concerns about immigration, whether that is to do with wage depression or whether it is to do with the perception that certain individuals aren't assimilating?
Well, if your concern is about wage depression, then it's not a legitimate concern because wage depression isn't caused by immigration. And in fact, Toby was again misleading there because he said, in fact, anti-immigration sentiment is highest in places with lowest or no immigration in there. Pro-immigration sentiment is highest in the places with the highest levels of immigration. And so to say that, people are seeing immigrants coming and stealing our jobs or raping our women or committing high level of sexual assault, again, Toby was wrong to suggest that they don't. There's no evidence for that. It is simply wrong. It's based on misinformation.
I'm going to bring Toby in then. Do you want to respond to that, Toby?
Well, I don't think it is based on misinformation. I mean, you may quibble with what Suella Braverman's description of a majority of the perpetrators in the various grooming gang scandals as being Muslims or being of Pakistani origin, but certainly they represent a disproportionately large number of the people involved
that's a lie.
in grooming gangs. And I think what about the various?
Let Toby finish his point, and then I'll come to you, Sam.
But Sam, are you suggesting that only the percentage of people in grooming gangs who are of Muslim Pakistani heritage is no higher than their percentage in the local populations where those grooming gangs have been active? That's surely absurd.
Sam, is that what you're suggesting?
The percentage of people convicted of child grooming of Asian origin is 6%. That is lower than the percentage of people of Asian origin in the population. So yes, that's what I'm saying.
But what about in the areas where the grooming gangs have been operating, Sam? It may be that nationally the figure you've just quoted is correct, but what about in places like Bradford, in places like Rotherham? Surely the number of Muslims in grooming gangs is far higher than their overall percentage of the population in those localities.
Well, given that no one actually collects that data and multiple freedom of information requests have been made to try and obtain it, I think it's completely irresponsible for you to be alleging that based on zero evidence. And in fact, when the national evidence points in the opposite direction. And that is the
Sam, we're having a discussion here about the evidence and about the arguments, and that seems to me a very healthy thing to do. But it seems, it's
saying things based on zero evidence.
Well, it seems okay, but it seems to me that discussion, you can say that you think that is based on zero evidence, and Toby can counter it, and we'll get somewhere. But maybe there's a point to be made that by suggesting that even having the discussion or saying some of the things that Toby is saying is in some way creating the conditions for violence, that might be a step too far. Isn't discussion the more healthy approach?
Discussion, when it's based on has some semblance of fact, when you're just making things up, and the things that you're making up have, as we've seen, contributed to discourse which actually endanger people, then no, I think, we have, of course, we have freedom.
Fine, well, let me give you another example, Sam, of that, just to see if this applies across the board. So in February, you wrote an article for the New European where you said something that was factually incorrect about a group of gender-critical women, including Jo Phoenix and Maya Forstater and Alison Bailey. And you said that these people have been publicly attacking trans people. That was factually wrong. The article had to be taken down. You were accused of libel as a result of that. And those women, by the way, have had death and rape threats from people who have read things in the press that have got them very angry, like your article. So do you accept that you are responsible for those death and rape threats? Would you like to say now on air that you're sorry for causing those death and rape threats?
No, because I didn't cause those death and rape threats.
Right, so there isn't necessarily causality between having a conversation and getting things wrong as you did to the crimes that occur.
You're alleging that I got things wrong.
You did factually get things wrong, yes. That's why you were accused of libel. That's why the publication took the article down, Sam.
Well, actually, Andrew, you're alleging a lot of things there.
Yes, I know. I'm not. You were accused of libel at the time. That's a fact.
I was accused of libel at the time, and no case was brought because
So would you like to, again, publicly accuse those women of publicly attacking trans people, which they didn't do? By all means, feel free to make that statement if you still stand by it.
I think that publicly attacking uses the Cambridge Dictionary definition. And that definition is, and I can't quote it exactly, but I'll give you a précis, which is to use very strong language to criticize people. I think
they didn't, though. Joe Phoenix did not criticize trans people. Joe Phoenix was talking about women's rights and the importance to maintain women's spaces. It is factually wrong to say she's actually been very open and extremely explicit about her support for trans rights. So you are again saying something that's wrong. No, I'm not saying that you are responsible, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't be able to say things that are factually wrong. But you can't then say that other commentators who say things that, in your view, are factually wrong lead to violence. It's an inconsistency. Can't you see that?
Yeah, because, well, firstly, every time I try to, you challenged me to repeat something on air and then interrupted me before I'd set it out. Secondly, so I will look up what I say because I'll quote it exactly. If you want to come back to that point.
OK, well, I can do it for you. You said that Denise Farmy, Rachel Mead, Alison Bailey, Maya Forstater and Joe Phoenix had publicly attacked trans people, or that gender-critical feminists in particular publicly attacked trans people. I want to come to you, though, Toby.
That's not the quote. You've absolutely misquoted me.
The quote is publicly attacked trans people.
What I argued in that article was that a deficiency in the Equality Act allows statements which I consider to be attacking trans people, which is a statement of opinion.
Yes, absolutely. And you're free to that opinion. And you're free to misrepresent the law. That's fine. But my point to you is...
misrepresent the law.
Yes, you did. You said there was a loophole in the law to enable gender-critical feminists to attack trans people. That's not true.
No, I didn't. I said
that's not true.
There is a loophole in the law which allows that because the law applies in the workplace, but it does not apply in the same way outside of the workplace. So if you make statements which may not be allowed in the workplace, outside of the workplace, then you're treated by a different
That's absolutely
standard.
fine. People are free to go and check it themselves. Oh, no, they can't because the publication took it down for fear of libel. OK, Toby, but what do you think about this? I mean, I think I'm trying to demonstrate a point here that it should be OK to have robust conversations, to get things wrong, to express opinions that I consider quite extreme. I consider Sam's opinions on that subject quite an extremist position. But I don't think he's responsible for the violence or the threats that ensued. Am I wrong about that?
No, I don't think you're wrong about that, Andrew. I think I read Sam's article, and I think my biggest issue with Sam's article is that he completely dismisses the concerns that people in areas with high levels of inward migration. He completely dismisses their concerns as almost beneath contempt. They've been led astray. The information they've been fed is false. They believe in conspiracy theories, etc. I would have thought that surely the way to address, if you think those people are just completely mistaken, if you think they're wrong about the costs in their communities of mass migration, the way to address their concerns is not to try and demonize them, smear them as members of the far right or people easily gulled by conspiracy theorists. Surely you take their concerns seriously and you engage them in robust debate in the public square. That is the way to try and resolve your differences. I mean, there's a great quote that someone came up with when I was on a recent Free Speech Union tour of Australia, which is that if you won't let the people you disagree with speak their minds, how can you hope to change them?
Well, let me ask Sam that. I mean, what would you like to do? You and I obviously robustly disagree on an awful lot of things, and I think that's fine. I don't think it's a problem that you think I'm very wrong, and I don't think you should think it's a problem that I think you're very wrong. But Toby just made the point that the conversation seemed to be the best way forward. Are you suggesting, I'm not putting words in your mouth, I want you to answer the question. In your article, what do you think is the solution to this? If you're saying there are people who are perpetuating far-right tropes or misinformation and that's leading to problems of violence, what's the solution to that? Is it, as I think, more conversation, or is there another alternative? Censorship, perhaps? What is it that you would like to see happen?
Well, I've got to note that people generally have this conversation when they're supporting the free speech of people they agree with and not the people they disagree with. But I think the solution is to cut down on misinformation. I don't think free speech includes the rights to mislead people. I don't think, I think it is legitimate to derogate from the right to free speech to limit misinforming people. And I think the way to deal with the rise of the far right is to cut down on people lying to each other with impunity.
So how do we do that? I suppose what I'm asking is how practically can you do that? Because obviously everyone makes mistakes and everyone says things that are mistaken, and that's part of being human, and particularly now we've all got access to the internet. So what I suppose what I'm asking is, on a practical level, how would you counter misinformation?
Well, I'd like to see politicians held to account properly for deliberately misleading people. And I'd like to see social media companies held to account, not required to sort of whack-a-mole various bits of misinformation, but required to publish their algorithms so those algorithms don't encourage the repetition of misinformation.
Toby, final word to you. Is that fair enough?
No, Sam's talking as if whether or not something is misinformation is completely straightforward. It's something that's apparent to everybody, and there's never going to be any disagreement about that. But as we know, Andrew, often misinformation is just a word people use to describe an opinion of their opponents that they disagree with. And there have been plenty of examples of things which have initially been dismissed as misinformation, like the lab leak hypothesis about the origins of COVID-19, about concerns people expressed about the cognitive decline of Joe Biden, initially dismissed as misinformation, not because they were misinformation, because that was just a way of trying to discredit and delegitimize a point of view you happen to find inconvenient or disagree with. The problem, Sam, is given it's never obvious what is and isn't, or often isn't obvious what is and isn't misinformation, who gets to decide? The authorities, the police, the government? Do you trust them to get it right and never just call something misinformation because it happens to be in their interest to do so? I don't trust them. Surely let people make up their own minds about what's false, what's true, what's misinformation, what's reliable information. And if it's misinformation, it will eventually lose the contest in the public square in a free and open fight.
OK, well, final word to Sam. What do you make of Toby's question there? What do you think of that?
It's pretty easy to determine if a lot of the time if something is misinformation. And I'll give you an example from Toby's website, where he claimed that a person had been imprisoned for 3 years for doing no more than saying anti-establishment things. When you actually look at the report of that, it is clear that that person was imprisoned because he repeatedly encouraged violence against Muslims.
Well, since you've now cited something that Toby published, I have to give him a right to reply.
There was a BBC report about why a particular woman who was sent to prison for things she said on social media. And in that BBC report on the BBC News website, it said one of the things, not the only thing, but one of the things she'd been sent down for was anti-establishment rhetoric. Now, if you're telling me that was misinformation produced by the BBC, maybe you're right. But in that case, I made the mistake of trusting the BBC.
OK. Now, listen, the pair of you, look, we could argue all night, and I'm sure we would, and quite enjoy it. But I really appreciate you both coming on. It's great to hear different perspectives. Sam Fowles and Toby Young, thank you so much. And next on Free Speech Nation, we're going to discuss whether the decline of religion has given rise to wokeness. Don't go anywhere.